Hello, thespians. Welcome back to another Dragon Con Theater and Performing Arts Lovers unofficial panel. Today we are doing our third uh, of a series we're doing, which is theater. It's not just musicals. This one we're talking about opera and Shakespeare. And I am joined by these two wonderful professionals here. If you guys could introduce yourselves, let us know why you're here. And Rivka, we're going to start with you.
Oh, okay. I am a full-time staff member with the Atlanta Shakespeare Company. I'm an actor manager, which is uh, most of our staff is actor managers, meaning that I have a desk job as development director, but I'm also a member of the acting company. I am a frequent music director. And now, as of just a handful of months ago, I am also a composer for the Atlanta Shakespeare Company.
Wow.
Um, and my other job is also I'm the music director at the Georgia Renaissance Festival, and next season will be my 30th year having worked the Georgia Renaissance Festival. I've worked it more years in my life than I haven't worked it. I realized that last week.
Oh, wow.
That's
That's
my background.
wow. Jackie, how about you?
Hi, I'm Jackie Pileckas, and I'm an opera singer currently based in Orlando. Right now, I do a lot of singing and performing with Opera Tampa, Opera Orlando. I was just in Virginia doing a show with Opera Williamsburg, and also in Atlanta doing a show there. And I just got home, so that's wonderful. I do a lot of concert music as well. I sing in a church choir. I'm
Oh,
trying to think. I wear a lot of different hats. A lot of performers will tell you, as Rivka so eloquently explained, that you do a lot of things to make ends meet. So I also teach voice lessons in addition to performing.
oh wow, that's amazing. Well, awesome. I really appreciate you both being there, being here, being there. Live theater, you got to roll with it.
That's right.
Being here today, I was hoping, this is a panel slash interview. So I would love if you guys would tell us kind of what you do. Why did you start? What inspired you to start in your respective fields? And this time, Jackie, I'm going to pick on you to start.
For sure. So that's kind of a funny story. I actually auditioned for this performing arts high school in close to my hometown in Norfolk, Virginia. I auditioned for the musical theater department, which I really, really wanted to get into because I grew up listening to all of the old movie musicals with my grandma on record, like South
Mhm.
Pacific and Sound of Music, um, Carousel, and I love them all. I did not get in. I actually got accepted to the vocal music department, which turns out they did opera. And my mom convinced me to go. She said, well, you can get your foot in the door and then maybe you can audition to transfer to the musical theater department a little bit later. But I ended up completely falling in love with opera. I did a report on Maria Callas, who is considered one of the greats in our field. For those of you watching who may not know who she is, um, she's particularly famous because she was also Aristotle Onassis's mistress back in the day. So you might recognize her from that as well. But I was watching her perform, and she's just such a great singing actress. And I was like, I'm sold. I also, as somebody who now cosplays, I think that was my start of that kind of obsession as well. I love getting to play dress up on the stage and inhabit these different characters.
Mhm. Definitely. Wow. And Aristotle Onassis, if you guys don't know, Jackie Kennedy famously
Yes.
married him. And my mom tells the story of when she was working in New York. She once, while she was working for Shell Oil, turned the corner while she was running to do something and ran smack into him. So,
Oh
you
dear.
know,
You never know.
exactly. Um, and Rivka, how about you?
Yeah. I kind of got shoved into it. um,
Okay.
my whole family sings. I'm the only one who does it professionally.
Mhm.
But grew up in a family where, as we were washing dishes or whatnot, we'd all sing. And I have a bunch of learning disabilities that were affecting me very strongly as a kid. And because of that, I didn't have, let's just be bold about it. I didn't have any friends.
Oh.
So, not all's well that ends well, I promise.
Yeah.
I am very fortunate now. But at the time, I was about 12. Um, my mother said, well, maybe she'll make some friends in an after school activity. So the Jewish Community Center here in Atlanta at the time had an all teen theater. And so my mother drove me to the audition, said, you're auditioning for Oklahoma. And she wasn't going to come back and get me until I had auditioned. And to tell you how much I knew about musical theater at the time, I mean, I grew up, like you, Jackie, I grew up with all the Rodgers and Hammerstein music in the house, but had never auditioned for anything. And I sang John Denver's Leaving on a Jet Plane. Again, which is how much I knew what an appropriate audition song looked like. But I very quickly found not just an aptitude for it, but a real passion for theater. And so, long after teen theater, I now have a master's degree in media and performing arts. I work full time as a musician and as an actor. And I thank my mom a lot, very often, for making me do that.
When did you get involved with Shakespeare? Was it in college or was it before? Or
Yeah, well, I was one of those nerds who memorized the entire balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet in English class because I could. Yeah, I was really popular, really, really totally popular. Isn't there a Wicked song about that? I think so.
yeah.
But
We're gonna make you popular.
right. But I got involved with the Atlanta Shakespeare Company as a patron first. My bandmate in my second year at Renaissance Festival was in a show there and said, hey, come see my show. And I walked into the room and it was it was like a soul deep connection. I was like, oh, I like this place already. I haven't even seen their art. Because it's set up as much as you can make a rectangular room resemble the Globe Theater in terms of that 3/4, well, for our room, 3/4 of it, an open stage with the entrances from hell and heaven and all of that. It's as much as you can make a rectangular room look like that. And so I was a patron there for 10 years prior to a development position being created. And I just happened to be graduating grad school and having learned a lot of business writing tools when that development position was created. So I just hopped right out of grad school onto a staff position. And it's almost 20 years and I'm still in love with that job.
I'm so jealous. I wish I could have fallen into something like that.
Yeah, there is a line out the door of people who are like, if you're ever going to quit, just let me know because I'll throw my hat in the ring. Yeah.
Oh. Thank you. So today we're talking kind of normally when we're doing these panels, we're talking about something like very decisive in the theater. Okay. So whether that be comedy or magic or stuff like that. But one of the things, um, especially with Shakespeare, it is part of the theater. But I guess my question is what makes your performance part of the theater? And Rivka, to expand on it for you, what makes it part of the modern theater?
Um, Shakespeare gave us a template by which we can, through theater, explore the whole gamut of the human emotional experience through text. And, you know, he was one of the chief architects of the English language. I don't know if folks who are listening are familiar with just how many now commonplace words and phrases that he came up with, that he created. So anything like My Own Flesh and Blood is his, Neither Here Nor There is his, Dead as a Doornail. So playwrights who don't even particularly care for Shakespeare or know much about him are likely at some point using his language to create their own expression. So I would say that all Western modern theater, anything that is written in the English language, uh, has Shakespeare to thank for a lot of how that play is going to work.
Oh, wow.
Shakespeare had a piece in that.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Jackie? What makes opera part of the theater?
So I do want to add that a lot of opera is actually based in Shakespeare text.
Mhm.
Verdi was a huge fan.
Yep.
He wrote Macbeth as an opera, Othello, which is called Otello because it's an Italian.
Right.
So all
There
over the
are like
place.
three Romeo and Juliets, right?
Yeah, there's a French one. There's the I Capuletti, I Montecchi, the Capulets and the Montagues, and Romeo and Juliet. So there's quite a few. But as far as why opera is theater, I think for a basic answer, we tell stories. I know that there's this huge misconception in opera that we stand on the stage and we sing and we have no expression on our faces. But especially, I would say in the last 20 years, there's been a renewed emphasis on having to have acting chops in order to convey these characters.
Mhm.
For myself, where part of the reason I found success is that's my favorite part, just inhabiting the characters.
Definitely.
And then there was a composer in the 1800s. His name is Richard Wagner. It looks like Richard Wagner on paper. Not a great guy. For those listening, I'm not supporting his viewpoints. You can look
Mhm.
those up if you're interested. But he had this idea called Gesamtkunstwerk. It's a German word which means total work. So he believed that opera encompassed all the art forms: music, theater, visual arts with these stunning sets, instrumental music. You have the musicians in the pits, dance. Opera always has ballet in the third act. We don't do it a lot anymore because it's expensive, but it was intended to be that way. So, and even today in modern opera, we still are seeing all of these elements come together to tell these stories.
Mhm. Definitely, definitely. Um, Now, I guess I also want to ask is what are some common misconceptions about your performance type? And Jackie, again, I'm going to pick on you.
About opera.
Yes,
Um,
opera, or if you do another type of performance about other types of performances, it doesn't matter.
so like I said, a big one is that we can't act and we just stand there and sing pretty. That is not true. I Granted, I depends on the performer, right?
Mhm.
I've heard some singers in my lifetime that I said, yeah, you sing so beautifully. I don't really care if you're acting. It's fine. But generally speaking, again, we are telling stories. It isn't like a wait until the fat lady sings with the Viking helmets kinds of things. Also, we don't always wear Viking helmets when we sing.
I
Uh,
want to do a panel actually specifically about opera, and and it will be called Opera. It's not just ladies in Viking helmets. That is absolutely a panel I want to do.
yeah,
So
sorry I
I love
didn't
that.
whip mine out for this occasion. I thought it
No,
would
you're
be fun.
Sarah though. You're Sarah, so I approve.
Yeah, because it's Labyrinth's birthday today. Thank you for noticing. I was
Aw.
like, we got a closet bound. Um, but and another thing too is also that singers of opera don't adjust their voices for different styles. So I'm primarily an
Mm,
opera singer, but I do dabble in other genres. I did a World War II USO style review last summer. So think Andrew's Sisters, that type of music, big band. I also do musical theater and I do adjust to fit the style. And a lot of singers who are successful, you can't just sing opera anymore. As if you're Renee Fleming, or you absolutely can. They're the people at the top of their game. But for most of us, you are dabbling in different genres, and you have to learn those styles as well.
okay, definitely. How about you, Rivka? What's some common misconceptions? And I think you do opera as well, so feel
I
free to
do.
throw in some stuff for that as
I
well.
do. No, no, I think Jackie covered it beautifully. I will add that uh, uh, part of that misconception, I think, that you don't alter the voice comes from. I bought this is when people were still using tapes, not CDs. I bought a tape of Kiri Takanawa singing Gershwin songs. And she was singing as the Kiri Takanawa we know from opera, and it did not work. I mean, and even as a teenager, I was like, that is not Gershwin. But I have since heard numerous other opera trained and opera working musicians, as you say, doing the right style for the right show. Um, yeah. So misconceptions. Shakespeare is hard to understand, and Rennies, that's what we call Renfest workers, Rennies are all nomads who live in a camper and have indiscriminate sex with each other. Those are the two main misconceptions.
Wait, you mean those aren't true?
I
What?
mean, for some people, a little bit, but I want to tell you about the Shakespeare first, because I feel so strongly about this. We The Atlanta Shakespeare Company does Shakespeare in a style that is called original practice. And there are various definitions of that, but for us, what it means is the audience is going to experience the Shakespeare the way the play was first experienced, which means we direct address the audience. We leave the house lights up enough that I can make eye contact with every single person in the audience. Farthest seat in the balcony is 60 feet from the stage, and that's it. Um, and that makes the Shakespeare a lot more understandable when you get the text directed at you, not
Mhm.
not that you're a voyeur to other people talking.
Mhm.
And we have every year we do Romeo and Juliet in February because it's studied in every ninth grade classroom in Georgia. And we
Mhm.
get inner city kids and deeply, deeply rural kids who many of them are below uh, grade level in language processing, language comprehension,
Mhm.
vocabulary, and it does. I'll admit it does take the ear about 5 or 10 minutes to acclimate to the Shakespeare. So the first 5 or 10 minutes, as you're getting that first scene, you're going to miss a good chunk of it. But
Mhm.
after a while, especially when you get the text delivered to you, it is, I would say, at the very least 85% retained. And I
Mhm.
know this because by the second scene, the kids are all laughing in the right places, and they're engaged enough that if some character says something um, unlikable, you'll get a little bit of, oh, no, he didn't,
Mm.
directed from the kids at the stage. And the gasps of surprise when Juliet draws Romeo's knife to kill herself in the end, because a lot of them see the matinee before they've read it. So they don't know that's
Mm.
coming. And you can tell by how engaged they are. That if they didn't understand it, they wouldn't be engaged because they wouldn't care.
Mhm.
It would all go over their heads and they wouldn't care. The
Mhm.
fact that they are that engaged means they're understanding it.
Mhm.
Um, and all I'll say about the Rennie misconception is I have a home and a husband and a full time job, and we'll leave it at that.
Now, one thing I always found, and Rivka, you were on our Shakespeare comedy panel, so we kind of touched on it then. If you guys haven't seen it, it's on the YouTube, so you should definitely check it out. It was a really fun panel. Uh, but the other thing is like Shakespeare is all stuffy and like hoity-toity, and it's like, have you never read anything he's written? Because
Right.
it's so funny. And the other thing is, like, I really hope, I'm hoping while I'm in Atlanta for Dragon Con that I can because I come in early, I'm hoping I can catch one of your guys' performances
Do
because
because I'll be in the
he
show.
okay, that's awesome. Okay, so I'll have to now I have to go. But one
I'll
of the
be
things
wandering around in cosplay probably, but sometimes I do sing. Still upset. I did lose the talent show at MegaCon this year. So
It
I
was
well,
rigged.
lost
I'm sure it was rigged.
I
mm,
lost to a breakdancing 8-year-old Spider-Man though, so like I can't compete with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely.
He was amazing.
The other thing I think I find interesting though about Shakespeare is how immersive it is. Like if you see it, like if you think about how it was performed, like it had to be because as you were saying, they were right there when it was written, like, and they were looking at people. It wasn't like a bunch of people up on Carnegie Hall stage or
Right.
anything like that.
Right.
So definitely. No, that's amazing. Um, and okay, now I gotta go see it. You convinced me. Okay, now, one of the things I wanted to ask was how has your approach to performance evolved over the time of you doing it? So like have you always wanted to like make it like classic Shakespeare or or like how it was when he performed it, or have you ever wanted to kind of go above and make it a little different? And Rivka, I think it's your turn to go first. So,
Um, I have always been a bit of a Shakespeare purist. I prefer Shakespeare. Uh, I prefer hearing his words spoken from their own time and place. Um,
mhm,
so that if you're addressing a king, then he's a king. He's not the CEO of Coca-Cola. So you're when you're speaking, my liege, my king, the guy is actually dressed like a king. Um,
mm,
I just find that it's easier to connect with that work when the text matches what you're seeing.
okay,
But I would say how it's evolved is that my approach has become far less about delivering a technically precise and perfect performance, and making it far more about connection and engaging with the audience, engaging with my scene partners. And something I got out of grad school was a Meisner technique, which, for those who don't know, it's an acting technique that, um, among other things, focuses on authenticity by reading what is happening in the real moment.
okay,
So if my scene partner is delivering a line slightly differently than they did last night, I don't deliver my line the way I did last night, because that isn't an exact match to what's really happening on stage that the audience can see. They can see
mhm,
what's happening. So if my line is delivered like last night's performance, there's a break in the authenticity. Instead,
mm,
we have license in the way that we're doing Shakespeare. Anything from delivering a line slightly differently, especially delivering a line differently because the audience has responded differently. If somebody says, "Ooh," how I deliver my line in response to that is going to be very different than if I'd gotten no input. Um,
mhm,
and it means that mistakes are, provided they're not dangerous to anybody in the room or to equipment, uh, you know, mistakes like I'm holding a prop and it breaks in my hand. Um,
mm,
that's not going to ruin the performance unless that prop is critical to the remainder of the play. Um, in which case we just find
tape.
some kind of substitute, right? But but I acknowledge that that's happened in the room. We share this moment together that will never be duplicated. And we've now had that theatrical experience that was unique and real, instead of I manufactured a perfect performance and the same one I gave last night and the same one I'll give tomorrow.
Okay, definitely. So adaption, almost not quite improv, but kind of like the same kind of like idea
Yeah.
of like adjusting to
leaving room for it to happen, at least if it's organic, leaving room for it. Yeah.
definitely, definitely. How about you, Jackie? How has your approach to performance evolved over time?
So I think for me it's a little different. One thing is that in opera you are kind of constrained by the music. I don't think that's a bad thing, but
Mhm.
there isn't as much improvisational freedom because you do have to deliver the lines in rhythm at the same time you deliver them every night, or else the conductor of the orchestra will take you out back after the show and murder you.
Right.
So if he doesn't do it during intermission, um, but I think for me a lot of it has been the types of work that I'm looking at performing.
Mhm.
So opera, and Rivka alluded to this. Opera has done a similar thing in that a lot of directors will take things and stage them in modern times, and sometimes it can be really strange, especially when people are dressed in business suits talking about Napoleon's invasion, and you're like, interesting. Is what time period are we in? Um, I don't make those decisions because I am not a director. You, as a singer, you kind of just have to go along with what is, what the vision is.
Mhm.
But for me, it's just been trying to approach a lot of these characters who are not making decisions that I think really align with my perspective as a woman in 2024. I will say, frankly, there are a lot of female heroines in opera that I just truly do not get. And a lot of people say, oh, well, you just don't get it because it was a different time. And I'm like, well, Elizabeth Bennet makes sense to me. And that was from the same time. And I think it's just
Mhm.
because a lot of these male composers didn't know how to write female characters. Just
Absolutely not.
being real honest. But I think for me, it's trying to find any kind of humanity in these women that I get to play, and
Mhm.
additionally trying to seek out more modern works. I had my That's kind of where my heart lies, getting to perform work for modern day about stories that I think resonate a little bit better.
Mhm.
I was just in an opera called Scalia Ginsburg about the friendship between the Supreme Court justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia, and I got to be Ruth, which
Oh,
was
wow.
incredible. And then I just did the operatic version of Little Women because I know there's a musical, and I got to play Jo March, and that is a character that I've been in love with since I was 8 years old. So it's really lovely getting to do the character work on those types of figures because I think there's a little bit more humanity and realness already to start with. So it makes my job a little bit easier.
Definitely. Now, we did get a question, and Jackie, I'm going to pose this first to you because I know Mama D is, when she found out I was doing opera tonight, she's like, absolutely, I will be there. So I'm going to totally butcher this. I always wanted to sing Luia's aria
Lulu
in Trinidad.
Turn.
Turando.
Okay. Is there a part you've always wanted to perform?
Yes, actually, it was Jo March in the Little Women opera. I feel like Rapunzel entangled right now. I'm like, you were my new dream. What do I do next? But I will say the other role that I really, really want to do, if y'all are familiar with this opera, is Octavian in Der Rosenkavalier. So I didn't mention this, but I'm a mezzo soprano, which is a lower female voice type.
Mhm.
If you couldn't hear from my speaking voice, and a lot of the parts that are written for my voice type are male characters that are meant to be sung by female voices, and so he's kind of the love interest in this opera. And there's this really beautiful trio. For those of you guys listening, look up the Der Rosenkavalier trio. It's one of the most spectacular pieces of music I think that's ever been written.
Definitely. Definitely. How about you, Rivka? Is there a part you've always wanted to play?
Uh, that's that's a little bit of a difficult question to answer because many of those roles would have been appropriate to play when I was younger, and I I have aged past them. So
Mhm.
I'm kind of at the transition space right now, where I'm going. All right, well, what roles are uh, my age now? Um,
I mean, Ian McKellen just did an age blind Hamlet, so I'm just
Mhm.
Fair,
throwing that out there.
Yep.
fair, and in an acknowledged experimental production, we might do that. but for our main stage productions, I'm not going to get cast as Juliet. You know, it's.
Mhm.
Um, I did get to play the nurse in Romeo and Juliet, which is a marvelous part, both as a comedian, and the nurse is one of the only adults in their lives who care. It's basically it's the nurse and the friar. They're the only adults who care about these kids
Mhm.
enough to be on their side even when it's not smart.
Mhm.
And so I love her theatrical journey of I'm the comic relief to actually I'm the warm fuzzy
Mhm.
uh,
Mother type.
mother figure. Um, I also just recently in an all-female production got to play Shylock in
Mhm.
Merchant of Venice, and I know some of your questions may touch on what are some of the things you've just done. I saw one question to which it was germane, so I won't talk too much about that now. I will say that my dream role now in musical theater is Desiree in A Little Night Music. I
Yes.
love the
Oh.
musical. And honestly, Desiree, the music was written for Glynis Johns, who at the time that that show was playing had aged quite a bit, was not a fabulous singer to start with.
Mhm.
And the reason why, so she's the one who sings Send in the Clowns.
Mhm.
And the reason why it's a chunk of text and then a break, and then a chunk of text and a break, and its range is maybe 6 notes, is because that's what she could handle. Isn't
Mhm.
it rich? Are we a pair? And that's how Sondheim wrote it for her.
Mhm.
But acting, the acting job that you will get to have as a Desiree is worth the lack of singing that I would get to experience.
Mm.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, that's awesome. Um, and that just shows like kind of the diverse range of roles that there are out there because you don't have to be young to play everything. So I think that's awesome. Now, one of the things when it comes to any performance, okay, obviously we're saying that everything we talk about is theater, but obviously each requires their own set of skills. So, what are some of the unique skills or techniques required for your performance type? And Rivka, you're first this
Oh,
time.
okay. Um, well, going back to Renfest, performing outdoors in a festival is a skill set all its own. A lot of the actors who play street characters in our village, our villagers, um, to put it perfectly frankly, would stink if they were given pre-scripted lines and had to perform that in a play.
Mhm.
But what they can do and do beautifully is craft a character that is not only engaging and fun and relatable, charming, but that they can sustain for 8 hours at a time, all
Mm.
improvised and in the 90-degree heat. So all of that ability combined is, and even for a musician, it's the same thing that I'm a musician out there, not a street character, but that requirement more on engaging the audience again than in giving a perfect performance. If they're passing through, I'm in a pub, maybe they're eating their lunch, and we happen to be performing. Um,
Mhm.
if I'm engaging, they'll stay after they've finished their lunch. They'll stay for the rest of the performance. If I'm not engaging, they'll talk through the performance and then they'll pick up their trash and leave as soon as they're done eating. So,
Mm.
my tips are dependent on the relationship that I create with them. Um, and performing Shakespeare requires that you communicate almost exclusively through language. We do give facial expression and body posture, but there's no subtext in Shakespeare.
Mhm.
Everything that is being thought of is on text. So one could hear a performance, and in fact, in Shakespeare's time, it was spoken of as "I'm going to go hear a play, not go see a play."
Mm.
Um, but one could have almost the exact same experience blind and hearing what was being said on stage, um, as they would seeing a modern play with sight and having to pick up, you know, 50% of the cues on what's happening between the lines. You know,
Okay. 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 That does make sense though. Like especially for somebody performing something as much as you do. That does make sense. How about you, Jackie? I'm sure there are all sorts of
Yeah.
special techniques and skills
I was going to
that you
say
require.
the big one I can think of is singing in multiple languages. So most operas are not presented in English; they're presented in their language of origin. So that can be Italian, French, German. I've also those are the big ones. I've also sung in Czech and Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic because Irish Gaelic is different, and Russian. And now I will fully say I don't speak all of these languages. I took French and Italian, and I know enough German that I was able to get around Vienna without embarrassing myself. But it's still really important, even if you're not fluent, that you have to know everything you're saying within the context of this 3-4 hour show. So there's a lot of translation work that goes in. So you can always see me right now. I'm gearing up for two operas, and I'm in front of the TV while I'm watching Netflix, rating in my translations as well as how to pronounce them. As singers, we use something called IPA, which stands for the International Phonetic Alphabet. You might be familiar with it,
Mhm,
but that's yeah. So I write that down in my score so that I know what sounds the letters make.
mhm,
And then sometimes there are just things that you have to work on because as a non-native speaker, there are sounds that our mouths just don't make easily. And there are dialects. I remember I was doing this art song cycle in it's in a Venetian dialect, and I was singing it in a master class. Then that's we have these like things for opera singers where you go and sing in front of people who work the pieces with you. It's like an open lesson almost. And they went, "Oh, your Italian is terrible. Like you're pronouncing everything wrong." And I said, "Oh no, this is a Venetian dialect." And they went, "Oh, I don't know how to help you with that." So there's a lot.
mhm,
And there's some other things. Opera singers, it's most often referred to as the most trained type of vocal technique. I'm not going to
mhm,
get into the nitty gritty, but you have to have a lot of breath support. I think in a way that when you're doing types of music that have amplification, so opera singers, we sing on amplified, you have to be able to carry over an orchestra. There's something in the voice that's called singer's ferment that allows you to be heard. But at the same time, our one job is to make sound and have a lot of stamina in which to do that. And you build that over time. Like I literally get on an elliptical and sing opera so that I can build my breath support. Um, which is really fun. And you also have to have really, really solid grounding in your body, strong abdominal
mhm,
muscles, things like that. Just because you have to rely on your support in order to project as
mhm.
loud as you need to be able to. I There is dancing in operas, but I think part of the reason that you don't often see the opera singers doing it is I do not think you would be able to maintain your support and be doing cartwheels. Um, but some fun special skills that come up are things like stage combat and fencing. Those happen a lot in opera, just kind of dabbling into other techniques. But we have a lot of wonderful people working behind the scenes to make sure we're safe when we have to do those things.
Definitely, definitely. Well, that's awesome. I mean, I never got into opera, but I did a lot of classical singing when I was younger, high school and college, and I can tell you all the breathe from your core, your
Yeah.
diaphragm, sing, like straighten up, like those things were just super drilled into you because I mean, that's the only way you're gonna be
Yep.
heard.
I'm always like, I know I'm doing it right when I feel like I've been doing crunches.
Now we did get a question from Courtney. Speaking of language, what is your experience with the American Sign Language interpreters at productions? Have you have any been really impressive despite not knowing the language?
Oh, good question. So I don't know if I've ever done an opera with an ASL interpreter. We have super titles in opera that are above the stage for pretty much everything that translate things into English. So I think that's why isn't normally a necessity, because they can read the words as things are going on. Now I will say this is kind of tangentially related. I saw a production at the Globe where one of the characters delivered like her lines exclusively in ASL.
Heard about
Like,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there was no translation. It was amazing. It did not inhibit like my experience at all. And I am not super familiar with American Sign Language beyond like a few basic things. And it was just a really, really cool choice to see that being made on stage. I saw a couple productions in that moment, and I can't remember which one it was. So, but I think if you look it up, because it was very experimental at the time, and it was kind of
Mhm.
divisive.
Yeah, I did hear something about it. I don't remember which production it was either, but someone had mentioned that to
Hmm.
me.
Rivka, do you have any experience with ASL in Shakespeare?
Um, yes, asterisk. Um, it can be done very well uh, for certain of the shows. Some of the difficulty lies in the fact that ASL is very literal and Shakespeare is metaphorical. So if Mercutio is saying, you were talking about Shakespeare being stuffy, Mercutio is a
Mhm.
great example of really dirty talk. He says the bawdy hand of time is now on the prick of noon. And we understand that to mean prick being, a male member, not a measure of time. But how it can be difficult to translate that image into sign language in such a way that both the literal meaning and the innuendo meaning are encapsulated. Um,
Okay.
Again, I say it can be. I don't say it is,
Mhm.
because I know of Shakespeare companies that have done it very successfully, and I think it just takes a lot of pre pre-production work with the sign language team to decide how to express some of the thoughts as opposed to just pretty cold listening and interpreting.
Mhm.
um, it's something that we are working toward as a company. We are uh, working to include that kind of work, but it's a slower process.
Mhm. And Courtney said, I imagine anyone who interprets Shakespeare well knows that they need to understand the imagery of Shakespeare. I would imagine you would think so, at least. I mean, um, I would think that would go hand in hand. Um, now, I'm gonna skip around a little bit on my questions, so I apologize, ladies. Is this something you always known that you want to do professionally, or was it just a hobby at first? And Jackie, I know you said you kind of landed into it unknowingly, but once you got into it, did you always know you wanted to be a professional opera singer, or?
I mean, I'm in too deep now, but it's too late for me. No, but kind of. So I this is not meant to sound obnoxious in any way, but when you're in high school and people are like, "Oh, are you a math science person or are you an English history person?" I never really struggled in school. I like math. Please don't hurt me. And so
There
I
are lots of people in theater who like math, so
yeah.
no worries there.
So I just feel like every time I say that, like people are gonna come out with pitchforks. But I very much, I think, could have gone into a lot of fields, but getting into music was the first time I actually really felt challenged. Like it was hard for me in a way that chemistry class wasn't. And I was like, oh gosh, what is this? I'm super interested. So I did end up going to college for vocal performance. And I did almost quit. So performing, I think in any field is really hard. You get a ton of rejection. And sometimes, unfortunately, people who run companies or instructors are not always kind. And sometimes I don't know if that's misplaced, because I don't think you should be sending somebody into what is a really hard field, even for talented people. And if it's not going to work out for them. But I had somebody, a mentor, tell me that I got rejected from every grad school I applied to. And I had one of my mentors say, hey, it's just an undergrad degree. You can do something else. And that absolutely crushed me. I
Mm.
was like, oh, it was my senior year of undergrad. I was like, what am I going to do? Fortunately, I had some really wonderful people on my team, and I kept at it. I got into the University of Florida because they had an opening for a mezzo. And I went for my master's, and I've just kind of been steadily grinding ever since. I realized I loved it too much to let it go. When
Mhm.
I was thinking of a future without singing, I was like, oh gosh, where could this go? Um,
Mm.
but I think on the plus side, a lot of people who face a lot of rejection early on, you get a tough skin. So when it happens, I have 5 rejections in my inbox right now, and they don't really, I feel nothing, because I'm doing so much that it's like, hey, there's another audition, there'll be another offer. Something will come along. And a lot of my peers, at my performing arts high school, we had small class sizes. Mine had about 20 in it. I would say that I am one of the like 2 or 3 people who's still singing, from my graduating class, which was 10 years ago.
Mm.
Because a lot of
Oh, wow.
times when people don't experience that kind of rejection, I the first time they get told no, they don't really know how to handle it. And
They
even when I
just
was
give
in high
up.
school, I was not the first pick. I
Mhm.
was always like, well, Jackie's okay, but we can put her in there. So I really, really had to work at it,
Mhm.
the entire time. So,
Yeah.
I guess I just love the grind.
Well, and that's amazing. I had a very similar experience in high school. Unfortunately, I did not take it and like throw it out and not listen to them, where I was told, Sarah, it's just whatever, and I had a lot of like, I went to private school, and unfortunately there was just like a lot of cliques and a lot of stuff, and
Yeah.
I was never picked for the parts. The only time that I ever um got a lead role was actually in a mall in the Night Singers. Funny enough.
Yeah. You knew them
um
all?
I did them all, but and
That's
I
amazing.
don't remember the name of the part. The Wiseman's
Yeah.
helper. Oh, I can't remember the name.
I my partner's been the wise man. I'll get him from him afterwards. So
But their little helper, we didn't have a guy singer who could sing it, so they made it a soprano role, and I was one of the very few people who could sing those super super high notes because of the how they converted it. So I got the role, and that was the only lead role I ever got in high school, was that role. And so funny enough, an opera part. But
that's
um
amazing. Yeah,
yeah, but so I applaud you for just kind of sticking with it, because it is
yeah, it
it is.
really wears you down. And I think just having a good support system is key, and also having people you trust, because
Mhm.
yeah, sometimes you're not doing a good job, or you can be doing better, but I think for me, like, constructive criticism is very, very different from outright hostility. And I
Mhm.
also, if somebody genuinely feels this way, I would have not reacted badly to somebody saying like, hey, I know you love this, but I don't know if this is going to be a good fit for you.
Mhm.
I do respect that. I don't know if you guys have seen Monsters University. I
Mhm.
really love that film. I think that's a big part of Mike Wazowski's journey, but he still gets to live in that world, and that's
Mhm.
important for me too. Even if opera, like, ends up not working out in the long run, I still want to find a way to live in this world. And there's lots of other avenues to take as well.
Definitely. Well, that's awesome. And I applaud you because that's awesome. You're living your dream. So, you got to play, like, I'm gonna be honest, playing Ruth Bader Ginsburg is pretty darn cool.
It was
Like, that's
so
pretty darn cool.
It
So
was so cool. Just a little bit of pressure, but it
Mhm,
was it was super cool. And like
mhm,
it was kind of the southeastern premiere, so we were featured on NPR. And I it was my first lead role outside of school. So
mhm.
it was very exciting across the board. I'm hoping somebody asks me again because it was a hard show to learn. So I'm like, hey, it's in my brain now. And
I know
you
it. You need to do. I can do it again.
and I have brown hair and glasses. Like put me in.
How about you, Rivka? Is this something you always knew you wanted to do professionally?
Um, yes. Once I discovered, after that forced audition, that this was something that that I understood. I knew how to do this. And yes, I took classes after I discovered the love of it, but instinctively I kind of got it.
Mhm.
Um, and I did want to, but I did not think it was a viable career. Everybody's always happy to tell
Mm.
you, like, if there's anything else you can do, go do that. Um, and My mother came through again. She's a smart woman. She's a super smart woman. And I remember looking through a, 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 a huge, thick book of every major that you could possibly take,
Mhm.
agricultural studies and whatnot. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm looking at like flower arranging. I'm looking at English literature. I'm looking at deaf interpreter training was actually something that I had an interest in. Um, and my mom says, what do you do better than anyone you know? And I said, act and sing. And she went, uh-huh. What do you love to do more than anything else? And I said, act and sing. She said, then that's what you should do. And I
Mhm.
said, you and dad would pay for me to get a degree in that? And she said, yes. And fortunately, it wasn't until after I'd graduated on Dean's List that she told me that there was a long period of time when she and my dad did not expect that I would go to college because I'd had such difficulty in school with the learning disabilities.
Mhm.
And they knew I was bright. They knew I would have success at something,
Mhm.
but they didn't think that the avenue to get to that would be academic.
College. Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah.
No, that's okay.
Yeah. So I knew pretty early on it's what I wanted to do, and I am really grateful that I have found a viable way to do that.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. And as Mama D said, come on, StreamYard. Well, Courtney, yay to
Yes.
supportive parents, but also love to mom because moms are the best. I grew up with a single mom, and I don't know what I would have done without her because she was always my biggest cheerleader. And so I've got to say that is absolutely it. Now, Rivka, this is actually typically I kind of use the same set of questions for these, but one of the things I wanted to specifically ask you was your cultural background, and only say what you're comfortable with. I know you've mentioned a little bit of it already, but how does your cultural background influence your performances? So.
Um, Quite a bit. At all but one of the characters that I've played at the Renaissance Festival have been Jewish.
Mhm.
And that's, to a certain extent, in order to create a memorable and engaging festival character, means superimposing a lot of external trappings onto your actual self. Like, all right, I might be from, like, my character right now is a Moroccan Jew.
Oh,
So
wow.
I've started learning some Darija, some Moroccan Arabic. My costuming is different, place of origin, the accent is different, but her personality is portions of me dialed up to 11. So think of if you got the Muppet version of Rivka, that's what a Renaissance Festival character is.
That's
Um,
awesome, though.
yeah, yeah, but it has, especially, I don't know, especially given the anti-Semitism in England at the time, in all of Europe
Mhm.
really at the time, it has always seemed important to me to somehow make my character realistically be in England, but be one of the only ones in her community. That there isn't a thriving Jewish community in Newcastle at the time. I'm
Mhm.
the only one.
Mhm.
And to incorporate kind of that dedication to something you know is going to keep you lonely,
Mm.
I don't know. This has been important. And yet, this was the question where I said, I know Shylock was germane to something. So as I said, we did an all-female production of The Merchant of Venice. And
Mhm.
part of the reason that that specific play was chosen for this first main stage foray into an all-female production was that the company had on staff, or I was told the company had on staff the right leads. So there's an actress with
Mhm.
our company, Mary Ruth Ralston, who is extraordinary. She has the ability to play the really generous and vulnerable side of
Mhm.
Antonio, who is the foil.
Mhm.
He's actually the main character. He is the merchant of Venice, but could also play his really uh, ugly, racist, deliberately cruel side,
Mhm.
um, and could play both of those with equal skill.
Mhm.
And they had a Jewish actress who could bring to Shylock the same kind of. Shylock is funny. He's actually
Mhm.
he tells jokes, or he tries to. They don't land with the Christian characters on stage very well, but he tries to use humor to diffuse some uncomfortable situations,
Mhm.
and he's very sympathetic, or especially at least the way that he. All right, the character has been misused, I'd say, a lot of times to argue for racism and anti-Semitism.
Mhm.
But I would argue very strongly that a knowledgeable perusal of the text indicates that Shakespeare's intention was to hold a really critical mirror up to the
Mhm.
racism and anti-Semitism of the time and go, these people, everybody on stage can be a hero and a villain simultaneously.
Mhm.
Um, and that's getting a little bit of a tangent, but the director made um, a point of hiring only Jewish actors to play the three Jewish characters in
Oh,
that
wow.
production,
Mhm.
because even though the play itself was written by old dead white guy, uh,
Mhm.
who probably did not even know any Jews. Because at the time he was writing the Edict of Expulsion of 1290, Edward I, where all of the Jews were expelled from England, was still in.
In fact.
It was still in like, maybe it wasn't enforced all that much. There might have been a handful of Jews. In fact, I know that there were. I know that there were a handful of Jews, but um, it there certainly weren't a lot. So
Mhm.
despite the fact that Shakespeare's text is what we're speaking, the director felt like this is a story for Jews to tell about the Jewish experience of that
Mhm.
time. It's not anybody else's place to tell that story. Um,
Mhm.
so um, If anybody ever wants to have an hour-long conversation about was Shakespeare anti-Semitic or not, and what value is there in still doing this admittedly very racist play,
Hmm.
I would happily have that discussion with them, because
Absolutely.
I feel like I can use the text to back up this is why we need to still do it, and this is why I think Shakespeare was actually advocating for tolerance.
Mhm. Well, definitely, and that sounds like an amazing panel,
Yeah.
actually. So
Well,
I might just
yeah.
take you up on that one sometime. How about you, Jackie? How does your culture, your upbringing affect your performance?
So I will say, and this may come as a shock, I am white. I'm very European. So it's interesting though. I was thinking about this the other day. I'm Lithuanian, in addition to
Mhm.
being German and French and Scottish and Irish and English. I think I got them all.
Hmm.
And my great grandfather Yusuf was a furniture. He worked in like a furniture factory, and I'm
Hmm.
like, man, like I feel like he would think it's so incredible that I'm out there singing opera because that's something I don't think would have been predicted, in that kind of socioeconomic class. Um, but you kind of touched on this, Rivka. Opera is hugely racist in a lot of the stories that are told. There are a lot of characters that are just very anti-Semitic, because in Europe, opinions towards Jewish people at the time were not
Mhm.
positive.
Yeah.
During the majority of these operas that are considered canon, they're performed
Mhm.
quite often.
Mhm.
In addition to have really, there's also a lot of Orientalism,
Mhm.
where a lot of Madama Butterfly, somebody mentioned in the comments, it's a really famous example. There's Otello, which is based on the Shakespeare, that's commonly performed, and also opera just stopped doing blackface. In
It
Europe, it's
happened
not.
in our mall, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not even joking. Like, yeah.
and in Europe, it still happens. Like I
Mhm.
don't, I don't think they see it quite the same way as we in America do, but I don't really think that's an excuse.
Mhm.
It's
Um,
not.
and I would say there's also been a movement to cast people in the correct ethnicities. However, what gets weird about opera is the voice has to come first.
Mhm.
And it sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect between, like, yes, we want to cast an Asian identifying person in this role, but we need someone with the right voice type. And there's also
Mhm.
something to be said that even casting like racially appropriate singers isn't going to make the text any better. It like doing the Mikado, Gilbert and Sullivan, if you are familiar with that.
Yeah.
It is a parody. It's supposed to be making fun of English society. There's actually a really controversial version. It's on YouTube where they set it all in an English hotel, and Eric Idle stars as Coco. And I think that's one of those places where taking these stories like out of the time and place they were in can be used to benefit it.
Mhm.
But I would also say that I'm a big advocate of still performing these works and being very, very uncomfortable, because I think that if we don't experience that, we face a future where we might go back to it. So I think the real answer to that kind of problem in opera is composing new works that are
Mhm.
taking these communities and portraying them like in a more three-dimensional light. There's an opera called Yardbird, that's new. It's about Charlie Parker. And yeah, it's really, really cool. It's like a jazz opera, very similar to
Ooh.
Gershwin's Porgy and Bess. I
Ooh.
saw somebody commenting about that. Florencia at Amazonas. I'm so sorry, my Spanish is not good, but that was just at the Met. And that is
Hmm.
by, a Latina composer, hiring those singers. We just did Frida here in Orlando. Up in Orlando, I wasn't in it, but that is because again they prioritize casting Hispanic and Latina singers, of which I am neither. So that
Mhm.
was really, really cool to see. So I think we're moving in the right direction. It's just there's a lot of debate about how much space should we be making for these new works. And I really think that we should be devoting a lot more space, but donors who fund our companies want
Sure.
to see, yeah, they want to see the
Bravo
standard.
M and they, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But I would add, Jackie, that to piggyback on what you were saying, I think there's tremendous benefit in still performing these works,
Yeah.
but openly acknowledging the problematic parts of them.
Oh,
Not saying,
definitely.
"Oh no, 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 we're gonna do clean Shakespeare. We're gonna do clean opera, and we're only gonna perform things, and we're gonna take out all of the lines that are offensive."
Hmm.
Do the work, but also have make available Q&As with the performers
Oh,
in which they acknowledge, what is it like to have to say that kind of line? What is
absolutely.
it like
Definitely.
to have to embody that character? And for that to just be on the table,
Definitely.
instead of like swept under the rug, you know?
Definitely.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredible. And I'm grateful to see there are a lot of companies that are starting to do that type of work in talkbacks and everything. And I mean,
Hmm.
I saw Lotello when I was in Vienna in 2019. And I mean, I still think about that production. And yeah, it brought up a lot of hard questions, but I think that's what it's supposed to do.
Hmm. And that's actually I love talkbacks for that very reason. At Dragon Con, we are partnering with the alternate history track to do South Pacific, and um, we're gonna have a talkback about that because now we're talking about musicals, but that musical at the time it was very controversial, but for a different reason than it would be controversial today, which is it was talking about how racism was taught. And at that time, like, I mean, that was huge. I mean, it actually tried to ban it in Georgia because of carefully taught that song. But now we're also going to be doing a talk back also about the perception, at least, of it being problematic because of cultural appropriation and leaning maybe into stereotypes and stuff like that. And it's a discussion that I want to have. One of my very good friends is a Pacific Islander. By heritage, and she's going to be on it, and it's going to be half sing along because it's an amazing musical. So everybody, you should come. I can't say what time it is because it keeps moving, but you should come when
Isn't
the
isn't that a con? That's the con experience.
exactly. And then we're going to talk about it and talk about its history and its basis in some of the cultural concerns that people have.
Yeah.
Now we are over. There's two questions I wanted to ask, and I guess you're both opera singers. So this question, there was quite the discussion in our comments about is opera not just a musical, and you're both opera singers, so I both want your opinion. But Jackie, I'm gonna pick on you first
I'm like, let's
because
go.
Yeah.
So opera was first. Okay. I just think that's really important. We were here
Mhm.
first. But I do think there's a point to that. One of my very first papers in school when I was studying opera, there's this big question amongst, I think, like opera industry professionals, like, who will write the great American opera? What is it? Where is our savior? It's musical theater. Musical
Hmm.
theater is America's answer to opera,
So
in
it's
my
Lin
opinion.
Manuel what
Yeah,
Lin Manuel Miranda is what you're saying. So,
yeah. I mean, Hamilton is completely sung through.
mhm,
Les Mis is completely sung through. Sweeney Todd, I just did it with an opera company.
mhm,
And I would say a lot of modern opera companies, because we are trying to survive, we are putting on golden age musical theater and Sondheim shows, because you have to really be a smart musician to do Sondheim. But so
Gotcha.
it but there was a
breast
transitional
support.
genre. It's called operetta.
Mhm,
The Merry Widow is a famous one. Pirates of Penzance. If you're Gilbert and Sullivan Vance, those are operettas, and that was kind of the transition from opera into musical theater.
mhm,
I would say nowadays, like, yes, operas are still being composed and musicals are still being composed. The biggest difference I would say is that musical theater is trying to appeal to a more popular fan base, and they're writing in music of the time. Whereas opera is writing in a classical idiom that is not necessarily meant to appeal to, like,
everyone.
everybody. It's highbrow. I don't necessarily sometimes love but it's less accessible, right? Like Hamilton is using rap and R&B and hip hop. Six is using pop and things that we hear on the radio. You're not going to hear Florence and the Amazons. You're not going to hear that style of music on top 40. So I think musical theater is a little bit better about evolving with the times, and they also will rewrite the book. Opera has
Mm.
this big thing about the composer wrote it, so we can't change that. I don't really agree with that. But I could talk for 20 minutes about that. But musical theater, when they do updated productions and they're trying to, I think, deal with other issues or confront the legacy of, like, Oklahoma, for example, they will physically go in there and update the libretto. And I think that's just, I love that. I wish opera would kind of get on that train with these 400-year-old operas sometimes.
How about you, Revka? What do you think? Is opera just a musical?
Um, no. So first, yes to everything that Jackie just said. And in addition to that, I would argue, with exceptions like Les Mis or Hamilton, um, in opera, as I was saying with Shakespeare, that it's all on text. Everything that you're meant to understand is spoken out loud. Um, in opera, everything that you are meant to understand is sung. There might be
Mhm.
3 spoken words in the entire show. It's all on music, in the same way that I refer to on text. It's all on music. In a traditional musical, the 1940s, 1950s, 60s musicals, um, you might, there's the understanding in musical theater that the music happens when the emotional experience is so heightened that it has to grow beyond speaking. It has to go someplace else, and where it goes is music. um, but a lot of what you need to understand that sets up the music is spoken text. There's a scene, and then
Mhm.
we sing about what just happened in the scene, or we sing to
Mhm.
further an idea of the scene. Um, so to me, that's probably the main difference. Again, as I said, with exceptions like Les Mis or Hamilton, that the bulk of the information is on music.
Okay, that totally makes sense. Um, I'm a little bit disappointed with my audience members not saying it, because I was counting on somebody putting that in the comments, but I knew I had to ask it because there was quite a decisive conversation
I
in
do
the chats.
I just do want to say this because I think this is important. Phantom of the Opera is not an opera. It is a musical about an opera house.
Mm.
I'm just throwing that out there because I know
It's
that
not.
it's
It's
confusing.
more, especially when you look at it, like, and you hear the history of Phantom of the Opera. He really wanted to embrace, like, more of that rock and roll, like, type, and it slowly became more. And I don't want to say operatic because it's not operatic, but you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
more traditional,
It's
I
like
guess.
a rock opera kind
Yeah.
of. I mean, I like it. I'm not dissing the
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say
Exactly.
it's opera adjacent.
Hmm.
Yeah, and a lot of people who sing Christine are classically trained because it's really hard to do that type of
Yeah,
singing without a classical technique.
Mm, definitely. Well, unfortunately, I'm not going to get through all my questions, obviously. But one of the things we always ask is if somebody wanted to start doing what you do, how should they start? And is this something that people can start later in life, or is this something you have to start when you're a kid? And Rivka, we're going to start with you.
sure. 100% you can start late.
Mm.
Um, you know, we're speaking to a Dragon Con audience, so I'm sure I'm not going to tell you any brand new news when I say that, Harrison Ford was a middle-aged carpenter when that opportunity for Star Wars came along and launched his acting career. Um, I would say the only time it is too late for a theater career, or even just theater participation, is when if age has affected your memory to the point that you cannot reliably remember and deliver your lines.
Mm.
But anything shy of that, absolutely. Um, and I would say what to do to start. Uh, Take classes. There are numerous in any fairly decent sized city. There are numerous schools at which I don't even mean colleges. I mean like every Tuesday in October type of schools where you can take technique classes. And then once you have a foundation, not like you're a master at it, but once you
Mhm.
have the basics down, go and see a ton of theater and half enjoy it and half have your antenna up for those moments when the timing is such that the comedy wouldn't have happened except because of the timing that the actor delivered the line in,
Mhm.
or when the moment particularly affected you emotionally, and analyze to see if you can articulate how did that actor craft that moment such that that was my response and my experience. And
Mhm.
with that foundation, you can start to say, okay, I understood why that was funny. It was funny because that line had a pause before it, or it was funny because that line came right in on top of the other actor's line,
Mhm.
or it was poignant because the actor wasn't just angry. The actor or the character wasn't just angry. The character was terrified and
Mhm.
responding with anger.
Mhm.
And that made it far more impactful than if you just had an angry character on stage.
Mhm.
So yeah, and it all is cyclical. See if you can mimic in the next class that you take what you saw on stage in terms of the effect, etc.
Mhm. Definitely. How about you, Jackie? Can somebody get started with opera later in life, or is this something you need to know
Yeah,
right now?
so opera's kind of a long game. Your voice does not come into its full maturity until you're in your 40s and 50s. That's like the
Mm-hmm.
best you'll ever sound. I'm 29, so I've got some time.
You're
Um,
all going up.
that's all only up from here. But I would say the biggest thing is like take some voice lessons and be willing to be really, really open. Voice lessons can be really, to some people, you have to be very vulnerable and find a teacher you trust, because they're going to be manipulating your face and asking you to do all sorts of weird things. You're not even going to, you don't just go in and sing songs. You're going to be like doing all of these silly exercises, but there's usually a
Mhm.
method to the madness. And then also, if you just want to know if it's for you and you live in a city that has an opera house, go and audition for the chorus.
Mhm.
They are always looking for people. And a lot of the people who sing in opera courses don't have a ton of experience. Like they didn't go to school for opera. They're just doing it because they love it. I
Mhm.
sing in the Opera Tampa chorus in Tampa, Florida. And there are guys in the chorus. They're like, yeah, I'm an accountant. One of my best friends is a social worker in the chorus. Um, so it can be a really, really great way to get in on the ground floor and start making some connections, and taking some lessons and getting to know people in the industry. I would say too, don't tell the two places I got my degrees from that I said this, but I think the biggest thing in opera is just having a good teacher, and taking good lessons. The stuff you're doing in a degree program, you can get without doing that degree program.
Definitely. That's the wonderful thing about arts is yes, the degree is great, but it's only like further icing on the level of the passion. So and why don't you guys tell me where you can find your current projects, if you have online presence, if you're going to be at Dragon Con, uh, and Jackie, I'm going to pick on you first.
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram. It's just at Jackie Pileckas, which is my name.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also launching my website this summer. So stay tuned. I will be posting about that on Instagram. But upcoming things, I'm doing a production of Pirates of Penzance in Orlando, Florida. If you're in town, I'm actually going to be playing a female police officer in the traditionally male ensemble,
Oh,
which is going
wow.
to be really fun. My partner is playing the sergeant, so it'll be a good time. And then I'm going to be in a production of Lucia de Lammermoor in Opera Williamsburg. If you happen to be in Virginia in September, playing Elisa, which is Lucia's friend. It's based on the Sir Walter Scott novel. So, and then I don't know if I'll be at Dragon Con yet. The plan was yes, but then I got offered this opera, and so I'm just trying to work out travel dates because I have to be in Virginia, I think, on September 3rd. So just
Go straight from Dragon Con
straight from
to
Dragon Con to Virginia. Yeah,
yeah.
and I'm also going to be in a production of Carmen in St. Petersburg, Florida in May. Or
Oh
sorry, June.
wow.
June. My rehearsals are in May.
Okay, well that's amazing. Um, okay, and Rivka, where can people find you?
Yeah, I misspoke earlier. We're sitting here recording a Dragon Con panel, so I'm thinking it's Dragon Con time of year, and
Well,
we're a little
to
early.
me, it is. My
Right,
life
It
is
is.
full
but
Dragon Con right now.
yes, but in terms of when the show that I'm in is running, it's running in July. So
Okay.
I will not be, to the best of my knowledge, in whatever is playing
I think.
at Dragon Con time.
Oh, what was it? I looked it up, but anyway,
I, I,
it
I'm
went out of my.
embarrassed that I can't remember. But so
I'm gonna look it up.
during July, I will be in As You Like It, playing Amiens, who is the Duke who's been banished. That's his court musician, and
Mhm.
this was we performed it last year. This is a revival of it, and this was the first show for which I composed the whole show. Um,
Oh wow.
yeah, and it was just announced that a very unusual occurrence is happening at the Renaissance Festival. They are instead of doing a haunt, they sometimes they repurpose the grounds for a Halloween haunt.
Mhm.
I'm losing the word. The scare houses. What are they?
Oh, like a haunted house?
Yeah, not a haunted house, but like Netherworld, that kind of.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Yeah.
um, Uh, but this year they are going to be doing a fall themed fall Renaissance festival.
Mhm.
Yeah, I am so excited about that because performing in 69 degrees is
Mhm.
far preferable to performing in 89
Sorry,
degrees
I
in the
just made
US.
eye contact with all my velvet Renaissance costumes in the corner, and I was like, should we go to Atlanta? I
Yes,
go to Ren fairs, so.
yes.
Yeah.
So that has not yet been cast, but uh, I am anticipating doing that.
Mhm.
Um, I'm terrible at self promotion through social media. I have a
Mhm.
Facebook presence. I technically have an Instagram presence, but I have not posted anything to Instagram since before quarantine, since before the pandemic.
Mhm.
And I had a Twitter, now X, account that I have not used in 10 years or so. So yeah,
Mhm.
you can only find me on Facebook. You can definitely find me somewhere at the Shakespeare Tavern. Um, so it's the Atlanta Shakespeare Company is the name of the company, and the name of our venue is the Shakespeare Tavern Playhouse, and we are walking distance from the Dragon Con hotels.
Mhm.
So if that's something you want to do, come in early on a Thursday night. I know that these days Dragon Con's already doing programming on Thursday, but
I was gonna say that's not early anymore. That's
yeah,
day one.
yeah. But if there's a night that you're like, I need to decompress a little bit and be around
Mhm.
people who are going to be quiet around me instead of being out in the mix of things, and you want to be an audience member, by all means, come and see a show.
Definitely. And I did look it up, and it's Midsummer Night's Dream is what you guys are
Right, right.
doing.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you looking that up.
No,
I am
that's
terribly
fine.
embarrassed that I did not remember
Oh,
that.
I love
I
Midsummer
wanted to
Night's Dream.
say it was Midsummer, and I'm like, nope, I'm gonna totally be wrong if I don't look it up. So
Mhm.
I just
Good.
yeah, no, but definitely and we always support you guys, and you guys got to it was kind of with our theater group at the parade. You kind of got to walk with us this
Yeah.
last time. I don't know if you guys are doing the parade this year, but I know like we had a lot
Yeah.
of fun and we weren't expecting you. All of a sudden, I had Lee screaming through the thing, "Theater people, where are my theater people?" We're like here, and then all of a sudden they're like, "They're with you," and we're like,
I
"Hi."
I do
So
Wonderful.
have to admit this will be my first Dragon Con. So
no, you
Yay!
absolutely have to come. It's gonna be
I
amazing.
know I'm
Just so
getting my
great.
cosplays together. I think I'm gonna be Eliza Doolittle from My Fair Lady
Oh, I
with
love
the
that.
hat.
I
Okay,
love
okay,
that.
all right. Well, and again, this isn't. I'm going into excited Dragon Con mode. We have a theater meetup. We have a theater photo shoot going on. Like we have all sorts of things. We got the parade. We still have a few slots in the parade if you want to do the parade. I
Don't
mean,
tempt me with a good time. Um,
but no, definitely. If you make it, check it out. If
yeah, I
and
think what will likely happen is if I go, it will just be I don't like only going to cons with Saturday being the first day, but I think
Mhm.
that will likely be the compromise so that I do have a day job, y'all, and I want to keep them happy since I'm disappearing for 3 weeks to go sing opera.
Right.
Oh yes, newbie. Oh, I'm surprised you're not calling fresh meat Miss Zombie Mama.
Uh,
um, but definitely. Well, I hope you make it, Jackie. If you don't, there's always another year. Dragon Con's not going anywhere, and who knows? Maybe one of these years we'll have a theater track. Fingers crossed. But anyway, I appreciate both of you being there. As far as where you can find me, typically you can always find me at Dragon Con Theater and Performing Arts Lovers Unofficial. As far as where you find me at con, when our panel list is announced, you'll find me at most of those things. But you will definitely find me out and about. I tend to be when I'm not scheduled on a panel, I'm a catch me if you can type of person. Um, what we've got coming next, and speaking of Phantom of the Opera, uh, on Wednesday, July 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have the first of hopefully a series in defense of Love Never Dies. Which, if you guys don't know, is the sequel and quite controversial,
Okay,
decisive
I love
musical.
I love Love Never Dies.
Well, I might just have to pull you onto that panel then.
I love it
So
unironically.
I love it too. Obviously, this was, and I got a few ladies together. I'm like, okay, I need to do this because everybody trashes on Love Never Dies. So definitely, if you love Never Dies, if you hate Love Never Dies, if you know nothing about Love Never Dies, come check us out then. That's July 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, if you're watching us on the YouTube, make sure you like this video. It really helps the algorithm. Comment, subscribe, join our Facebook community if you haven't already. Again, it's Dragon Con Theater and Performing Arts Lovers Unofficial. We are not an official part of Dragon Con, but well, hopefully one day we can. And by participating in our stuff and liking our stuff, you help that dream maybe one day become a reality. But until then, we're gonna let you all go. And uh,
say bye, Pepper.
definitely. Oh, bye.
Bye, Pepper.
Thank you. And you have a wonderful rest of your night, audience. Bye bye.